Hey, second graders. We are going to be reading chapters 5 and 6 of Magic Treehouse #1, Dinosaurs Before Dark by Mary Pope Osborne. Before we start reading today, I want you to make sure you're thinking about all of the things that good readers do when they're reading or listening to a story. And you guys remember that some of the things that we always want to remember to do is make text-to-self connections. So thinking about, how is this book like my real life? You're thinking about making text-to-text connections, which means, is this book like a book that I've read before or a story that I've heard before? You're making inferences, so you're taking clues from the text, plus things that you already know, to understand things that the author isn't saying to you. So, for example, if a person in the story is jumping up and down and laughing, you might know from that clue and thinking, well, usually people do that kind of thing when they're happy. You might be able to say that the character is happy, even if the author didn't tell you that the character is happy. That's making an inference. Okay, you're also going to be visualizing or using your imagination to picture what's happening in the story. And lastly, you're wondering. So the whole time you're reading or listening to a story, you're always asking questions and thinking about what might happen next or things that you're curious about. You're asking questions and wondering the whole time. Okay, so we're going to read chapters 5 and 6. When we left off in chapter 4, Jack and Annie had just seen a huge dinosaur up on a hill. So you made some predictions last time in your head about what might happen next. I want you to remember what those predictions were. Think back. What were some of the things you thought might happen next? All right. Chapter 5, Gold in the Grass. Go, go, said Jack. He threw his notebook into his pack. He pushed Annie toward the rope ladder. Bye, Henry, she said. Go, said Jack. He gave Annie a big push. Quit it, she said. But she started up the ladder. Jack scrambled after her. Scrambled means he went as quick as he could. They tumbled into the treehouse. They were panting or breathing really hard as they looked out the window at the dinosaur. He was standing on the hilltop, eating flowers off of the tree. Oh man, whispered Jack, we are in a long time ago. The dinosaur looked like a huge rhinoceros. Only he had 3 horns instead of 1. 2 long ones above his eyes and 1 on his nose. He had a big shield-like thing behind his head. Triceratops, said Jack. Does he eat people? Whispered Annie. I'll look it up. Jack grabbed the dinosaur book. He flipped through the pages. There, he said. He pointed to a picture of a triceratops. He read the caption. Remember, a caption is words underneath the picture in a book. The Triceratops lived in the late Cretaceous period. This plant-eating dinosaur weighed over 12,000 pounds. Jack slammed the book shut. Just plants, no meat. Well, let's go see him, said Annie. Are you nuts? Said Jack. Don't you want to take notes about him? Asked Annie. We're probably the first people in the whole world to ever see a real live Triceratops. Jack sighed. She was right. You might be making an inference right now about how Jack is feeling, because you might think about what is happening in the story and what you already know about how people feel if they sigh or go. So think, what inference can you make right now? Jack sighed. She was right. Let's go, he said. He shoved the dinosaur book into his pack. He slung it over his shoulder and started down the ladder. On the way down, Jack stopped. He called up to Annie. Just promise you won't pet him. I promise. Promise you won't kiss him? I promise. Promise you won't talk to him? I promise. Promise you won't. Go, go, she said. Jack went. Annie followed. When they stepped off the ladder, the pterodon gave them a kind look. Annie blew a kiss at him. Be back soon, Henry, she said cheerfully. Shh, said Jack, and he led the way through the ferns, slowly and carefully. When he reached the bottom of the hill, he kneeled behind a fat bush. Annie knelt beside him and started to speak. Shh! Jack put his finger to his lips. Annie made a face. You might be making another inference right now about how Annie is feeling if she's making a face at him. Jack peeked out at the Triceratops. The dinosaur was incredibly big, bigger than a truck. He was eating the flowers off of a magnolia tree. Jack slipped his notebook out of his backpack. He wrote, "Eats flowers." Annie nudged him. Jack ignored her. He studied the Triceratops again. He wrote, "Eats slowly." Annie nudged him hard. Jack looked at her. Annie pointed to herself. She walked her fingers through the air. She pointed to the dinosaur, and then she smiled. Was she teasing? She waved at Jack. Jack started to grab her. She laughed and then jumped away. She fell into the grass in full view of the Triceratops. "Get back!" whispered Jack. Too late. The big dinosaur had spotted Annie. He gazed down at her from the hilltop. Half of a magnolia flower was sticking out of his mouth. "Oops," said Annie. "Get back!" Jack shouted at her. "But he looks nice, Jack." "Nice? Watch out for his horns, Annie." "No, he's nice, Jack." Nice. But the Triceratops just gazed or looked calmly down at Annie. Then he turned and lopped away, down the side of the hill. "Bye," said Annie. She turned back to Jack. "See?" Jack grunted, but he wrote in his notebook, "Nice." Here you can see Jack's handwriting. "Come on, let's look around some more," said Annie. As Jack started to walk after Annie, he saw something glittering in the tall grass. He reached down and picked it up. A medallion, a gold medallion. Here you can see a picture of what he picked up out of the grass. A letter was engraved or written on the medallion, a fancy M. "Oh man, someone came here before us," Jack said softly. Chapter 6, Dinosaur Valley. "Annie, look at this," Jack called. "Look what I found." Annie had gone up to the hilltop. She was busy picking a flower from the magnolia tree. "Annie, look, a medallion." But Annie wasn't paying attention to Jack. She was staring at something on the other side of the hill. "Oh, whoa," she said. I want you to make a prediction in your head right now. What do you think she's seeing on the other side of the hill? "Oh, whoa," she said. Annie. Clutching or grabbing her magnolia flower, she took off down the hill. "Annie, come back," Jack shouted. But Annie had disappeared. "I'm going to kill her," Jack muttered. He stuffed the gold medallion into his pocket. Then he heard Annie shriek. "Annie?" Jack heard another sound as well, a deep, bellowing sound, like a tuba. "Jack, come here," Annie called. "Annie!" Jack grabbed his backpack and raced up the hill. When he got to the top, he gasped. The valley below was filled with nests, big nests made out of mud, and the nests were filled with tiny dinosaurs. Annie was crouching or down low next to one of the nests, and standing over her was a gigantic duck-billed dinosaur. "Don't panic, don't move," said Jack. He stepped slowly down the hill toward Annie. The huge dinosaur was towering above Annie, waving her arms, making her tuba sound. Jack stopped. He didn't want to get too close. He knelt onto the ground. "Okay, move toward me, really slowly," he said. Annie started to stand up. "Don't stand, crawl," said Jack. Clutching her flower, Annie crawled toward Jack. The duck-billed dinosaur followed her, still bellowing or yelling. Annie froze. Keep going, Jack said softly. Annie started crawling again. Jack inched farther down the hill until he was just an arm's distance away from Annie. He reached out and grabbed her hand. He pulled Annie toward him. Stay down, he said. He got down next to her. Bow your head. Pretend to chew. Chew? Yes, I read that's what you do if a mean dog comes at you. She's not a dog, Jack, said Annie. Just chew, said Jack. Jack and Annie both bowed their heads and pretended to chew. Soon, the dinosaur got quiet. Jack raised his head. I don't think she's mad anymore, he said. Thanks, Jack, for saving me, said Annie. You have to use your brain, said Jack. You can't just go running up to a nest of babies. There's always a mother nearby. Annie stood up. Annie! Too late. Annie held out her magnolia flower to the dinosaur. I'm sorry I made you worry about your babies, she said. The dinosaur moved closer to Annie. She grabbed the flower from her. She reached for another. No more, said Annie. The dinosaur let out a sad tuba sound. But there were more flowers up there, Annie said. She pointed to the top of the hill. I'll get you some. Annie hurried up the hill. The dinosaur waddled after her. Jack quickly examined the babies. Some were crawling out of their nests. Where were the other mothers? Jack took out the dinosaur book. He flipped through the pages. He found a picture of some duck-billed dinosaurs. He read the caption. The Anatosauruses lived in colonies. A colony is like a big group or a big family. So they lived in colonies. While a few mothers babysat the nests, others hunted for food. So there must be more mothers close by. Hey, Jack, Annie called. Jack looked up. Annie was at the top of the hill, feeding magnolia flowers to the giant Anatosaurus. She's nice too, Jack, Annie said. But suddenly, the Anatosaurus made her terrible tuba sound. Annie crouched down and started to chew. The dinosaur barged down the hill, which means she ran really quick. She seemed afraid of something. Jack put the book down on top of his pack. He hurried up to Annie. Okay, I want you to think in your head right now, what are you visualizing in this part? What did you visualize when I said the dinosaur barged down the hill? She seemed afraid of something. Picture that in your head. I wonder why she ran away, said Annie. We were starting to be friends. Jack looked around. What he saw in the distance almost made him throw up. An enormous, ugly monster was coming across the plain. A plain is like a big field. He walking on two big legs and swinging a long, thick tail and had two tiny arms. He had a huge head and his jaws were wide open. Even from far away, Jack could see his long, gleaming teeth. Tyrannosaurus Rex, whispered Jack. All right, and that is the end of chapter 6. So I hope that while you were listening to that story, you were using all of your skills that good readers use. I will read chapters 7 and 8 in the next video, so make sure you listen to find out what happens with the Tyrannosaurus Rex.